and welcome back to Spirit Chats with Kat. On my last episode, I told you about an incident that occurred when we moved to the South. This episode takes place still in the South, just a different small town in the South. One thing that you will see during my podcast is that we moved around quite a bit. And even as an adult, I have moved around quite a bit as well. Usually what happens is we would relocate based on work or something like that. So this episode takes place in another small town in the South that we moved to. There are several things that happened in this location. We moved into another rental home, and it was outside of this small town by quite a ways. I just remember, riding the school bus, it would take us about 30 minutes to get from our house into town. And this house sat up on a hill, and it was 2-story. You could enter on the ground floor from sliding glass doors that opened up into the kitchen, or you could enter on the ground floor from French doors. That actually it was from the second floor, but it also opened up out onto the ground. And there were French doors in my parents' bedroom. I'm not sure what you call this type of house, but both floors, the first floor and the second floor, they both opened up onto the ground, and it was built onto a hillside. So it had an intercom system that had been put into it at some point in time. I don't know if it was put into it when the place was first built, or if it was installed later, but it did have an intercom system. And I remember when we moved into that place, I was so excited. I thought we were big time because we had a house that had an intercom system in it. And it had this place, it also had sliding glass doors on the second floor that opened up onto a big deck. So there was you come in, typically what we did was we would park on the parking pad outside the sliding glass doors that opened into the kitchen. And then we would come into the house through the kitchen. And if you go through the kitchen and you turn a corner, there was a bedroom there and stairs that went upstairs. And at the top of the stairs, there was a large living room area, and in that living room area were the sliding glass doors that opened up onto the deck. That's if you turned left at the top of the stairs, and then if you went right at the top of the stairs, you would find 2 more smaller bedrooms and the master bedroom. And a bathroom was upstairs, and there was a bathroom on the ground floor as well. So that's the layout of this house. This house actually was very active. It wasn't a very old home, so I don't know if something significant happened in the home before we came to rent it, or if it was due to the location. I'm not really sure what it was that caused so much activity at this house. But some of the things that were happening, my siblings actually witnessed as well. And that made me feel validated because I wasn't the only one having these experiences. So, the first experience that we will talk about is one that occurred when my brother and I had gotten off the school bus, and we got to the house and it was just he and I there. For some reason, no one else was there. My mom typically was there when we got home from school, but this day she wasn't. So we were outside playing, and it was in August or September. You know how it's still hot during the day and cools off at night. It was during that time period of the year. So I decided that I was too hot in the jeans that I had on, so I was going to go into the house and put some shorts on. So I came in through the house and came upstairs, ran up the stairs, and turned to the right to go into the bedroom. And I looked down the hall, and at the end of the hall was my stepfather and my mom's room. And their doors to enter the room, they had French doors there and glass panes in the French doors. So not much privacy. And you could see from the top of the stairs all the way back to the other door that opened out to the outside at the back of their room. So I came running up the stairs. I ran around the corner and, looking down at my feet as I'm going up the stairs so I wouldn't fall. And I looked down the hallway, and in my parents' room, I see someone. And to me, it was scary because of how odd they looked. They did not have skin. So it definitely looked like a human. It was red from head to toe, had eyes like a human, a mouth like a human. But if you've ever looked in a medical book and you've seen, you've flipped through the pages where it shows you like muscle tissue and things like that, this looked like a person made out of muscle tissue, no skin, just the muscle tissue. That was the way that my childish brain interpreted it. And as an adult looking back on that, I don't know if it was muscle tissue or if it was maybe a burn victim or something like that. But, to a child, it was scary looking and looked, I guess you could say, grotesque. It was partially into the floor, meaning from the knees down, that part of it was in the bedroom floor. So all I could see was from the knees up. And it was bending over at the waist and digging. So as if one who's looking for something in the dirt would dig. We would bend over at the waist and, just kind of scrabble with our hands, sift through the dirt or whatever on the ground. That's how we would do it. Well, that's what this individual was doing. And I stopped immediately when I saw that, shocked as you can imagine. I was never a little girl that would scream. I was more somebody whose any sound that would come out would just die in my throat. I was frozen. My vocal cords were frozen. Everything was frozen as I watched this individual in my parents' bedroom. And I'm having a conversation with myself in my head at this point in time when I'm watching this individual, and I'm trying to figure out once again, what am I seeing? What am I seeing? Is somebody here working on stuff and we didn't know anything about it? Or, what is this that I'm seeing? As soon as I had that thought, then right behind it, I had another thought. Nobody looks like that, so that's not someone here to work on anything. And while I am struggling to identify this and struggling with this conversation, the individual stopped as if they felt someone staring at them, and they turned around and looked at me. And they looked at me for a second, and then they smiled. And as a child, to have something of that shape and form looking at you and smiling, that was pretty terrifying. But as an adult looking back on that, I feel like it must have been, they probably were trying a friendly approach, and because of the way that they looked, it just didn't come across as friendly. It came across as scary. And I think that must have been, why it scared me as bad as it did, and why they were trying to smile at me. If you remember in my previous podcast, I made reference to the fact that I've never really had, I guess, aggressive encounters. I just felt like their approach was messy because they weren't used to someone who could see them. And after I had time to process this circumstance, that's how I felt about it. I felt like whoever it was just, like I said, they were trying to approach me in a friendly manner, not realizing how fearful how scary they would appear to someone who at this point in time was 8 years old. So, I at a later date, looking back on it, I felt bad because they probably were so excited to just have someone interacting with them. And this person that finally noticed them was scared to death. And when they smiled at them, turned around and ran as fast as they could in the other direction. I mean, if you think about it from the perspective of a spirit, if they've been around for a while and everyone has just brushed them off and, just convinced themselves that what they were hearing or what they were seeing was their imagination, and they got no interaction. And then all of a sudden someone is clearly seeing them and making eye contact with them and recognizing that, hey, they exist. Imagine how exciting that would be, And the spirit was probably like, oh, hey. and trying to smile at me, but because they just looked like a figure with no skin, there was no lips. It looked like they were trying to frighten me when actually they were just trying to be friendly and put their best foot forward, and approach in a friendly manner. So I felt bad for my reaction, although it was a natural reaction. I felt bad because it must have been hurtful to them. And I hate that. I don't like to hurt them because I feel like, if they're still here, they've been hurt enough. And I don't want to add to that. So anyway, as I mentioned before, when they smiled at me, I just immediately turned around and ran back down the stairs and out the door. And as I was going, if you remember, I mentioned in my last podcast how it feels when a spirit is close to me and how I feel like someone is invading my personal space from behind. And that's exactly how I felt all the way back down the stairs, around the corner, through the kitchen and out of the house until I got out away from the house for a little distance. And then I began to feel that feeling go away. When I came running out of the house, my brother, said, "Hey, I thought you were going in to put shorts on." And, I didn't, as I mentioned before, I didn't share every single experience that I had because sadly, I was ostracized enough with the experiences that I had shared. So 99.9% of the time, I did not say anything to anyone about anything that was happening because I didn't want people to view me in the way that they were viewing me when I would try to look for validation from someone else. Because, most people that are having these experiences are convincing themselves that this isn't happening. And then some people don't have them at all. I think because I don't know. I mean, I don't know why they don't have them because I really do feel like we all could have them if we recognized that they were happening. So I'm not really sure why some people don't have them. I guess it's just that they are closed off to that. And maybe because of everything that happened to me from a very young age, and because certain things ran in my family, I've never been closed off to it. Even though people tried to convince me that these instances were negative and it was something shameful, I never felt that way. I never felt like this was something I should be ashamed of. I've for the most part in my life, I've been, when it comes to fight or flight, I'm more of a fight individual per se, meaning I would stick up for myself and it would just be exhausting. So in order to avoid having to stick up for myself and deal with the conflict and the confrontation, I would just keep these things to myself. So when my brother asked me, what happened? I thought you were going in to put shorts on. I just said, I'm not really that hot. I don't know why I wanted to do that. So, that was my explanation for why I didn't put shorts on. After a while, he had decided that he wanted to go in the house and hang out. And he was like, "Come on, let's go inside. It's hot out here. And I said, no, I want to be outside. And I refused to go back in the house. So, and I kind of had guilt over that as well, because I knew that something was in the house, something or someone was in the house, and I just sent my younger brother in there on his own, hey buddy, you go deal with it. But, for a 7 or 8 year old, what, like, I have always struggled with what is the right thing to do as far as things like this are concerned. Was it the right thing to tell him and, be derided? Or was it the right thing to accompany him into the scary house after what I had just seen? I didn't know what the right thing to do was, but I feel like I most likely was in self-preservation mode at that point in time. And he was insisting on going back in the house no matter how hard I tried to talk him out of it. And there was no way I was going back in there, because that was scary. That is the first and only time I've ever seen something like that. So I think that something must have happened there. And I think that that may have been why it was such an inexpensive rental. That something occurred and the owners of the place didn't want to be associated with it per se. And as a quick fix, they moved out and put it up for rent. So that was the first thing that happened there. So I mentioned to you that there was an intercom in this home. One day I was in the house by myself. I did have several siblings, that lived there. We were not a small family. There were 6 of us children, and the oldest sibling was not living there, but the next oldest and down, we all lived there with my stepmother and my stepfather. With my mother and my stepfather. And the next oldest sibling, she was married and her husband lived with us. She and her husband came and went. So, it was a full house. But most times, there was nobody in the house. And I will talk about why I think that was in just a minute. But right now we're going to talk about the intercom. I was in the house by myself this day, and I heard the intercom come on. Well, when we'd moved into the place, after I'd been so excited about there being an intercom in the home, we had been told by the previous owners that it didn't work. So that was a letdown for me, because I was so excited. I thought it was like walkie-talkies in the wall, that sort of thing. So I was sad about that. So imagine my surprise when I'm in the house by myself and the intercom pops on. And a full-on conversation between a male and a female is occurring on the intercom. So one side of the intercom was in the hallway downstairs, and the other side of the intercom was in the master bedroom. So I heard the voices of a male and a female. The male came on first and said something, and then I heard a female voice respond. And they were chit-chatting back and forth, and I got the sense that they were a couple. Just in the way that they were enjoying the banter, the chatting back and forth. And then after I listened to it for a few minutes and I was listening to the voices trying to determine which of my siblings they belonged to, I realized these were not young children. These were adults. This was an adult male and adult female talking. So at that point in time, I called out, "Hello, who's in here?" And the conversation on the intercom came to an abrupt stop, just completely stopped. And again, I said, "Hello." And at the time that I'm calling out, I'm going around looking. Okay, so I'm looking in the downstairs hallway, and there's no one at that intercom box. And I put my foot on the bottom stair, and I'm getting ready to head upstairs and look at that box, see who is up there. And the intercom pops on again with the male, and he begins laughing. And it wasn't a very nice laugh. You know, as a child, I will tell you that laugh made me feel very vulnerable, because it was as if it was mocking me. And I waited for the female to come on and say, something like, "Come on, don't torment the kids." But nothing ever happened. And I ran up the stairs, scared out of my mind, still intent on checking the other box, and got up to the hallway and nobody was there. You could see into my parents' room. There was no one in it. And the laughter stopped. So, that made me feel very confused and vulnerable. I don't know why that spirit felt like that was a good thing to do. It could have just simply been that he was a spirit that didn't care for children. Just when we pass away, it doesn't mean we automatically love kids then, if we didn't love them in life. So he just may not have liked children. He might have been a grumpy pants who didn't like kids. So I don't know. I don't necessarily think that he was trying to harm me. I don't feel like he was trying to harm me in any way. I just feel like maybe he didn't like children. So, this home, needless to say, those two things happened, and I did not feel safe in the home from that point. And again, I think that was just my own interpretation. But this is how 7 and 8-year-old me felt. Just didn't feel safe in the home. So something else that would happen in this house is we would typically be sitting down to dinner as a family, and the stereo upstairs would just randomly turn on, full blast. I mean, the sound would be turned all the way up, and it would just randomly turn on. And sometimes there was music, and sometimes it was white noise. And we would all look at each other, when that happened. And then we would start trying to make deals with each other as to who is going upstairs to turn it off, because, of course, because I was a family weirdo. Of course, I was the first person that everybody looked at like, go turn that off, But I would start trying to make deals like, hey, if you'll go turn that off, I know it's your night for dishes. If you'll go turn it off, I'll do your dishes tonight. And that works once or twice. And then it became, when I tried to make that deal with somebody, nobody wanted to go up there and do it. So we would fight. We would fight with each other as to who was going to go up and do it. And so, that was something that occurred in that home as well. And it always made me feel validated because my siblings were experiencing it too. It wasn't something that was occurring when I was the only person in the home, and it wasn't something that only I could see or I could hear. They were having to deal with it as well. So, that was a time in my life and one recurring instance that made me feel better because we were all experiencing the same thing. So let's move on to the next incident that happened there. I had mentioned to you that occasionally my sister and her husband would move in and out of the home with us. And during this period in time, when this next instance occurred, they lived in the home with us. So whenever they would move in, there was shuffling that occurred because we had to have room for everybody to fit in the home. So, if they didn't live with us, then my older sister got the bedroom downstairs. The two boys shared the larger bedroom upstairs. I got the little bedroom upstairs, and my parents, of course, had the master. But because we all lived in the home together, my sister and her husband had moved in with us. They got the bedroom downstairs. The boys stayed in their room. My parents stayed in their room. My sister got my little bitty room. And I got shuffled out to the living room. So in the living room at night, every single night, I would hear someone walking up and down the stairs and walking around in the living room and around down the hall. Just, it seemed like pacing. The rental home had a baby gate at the bottom of the stairs and a baby gate at the top of the stairs. And I would hear the baby gate at the bottom of the stairs open and close, footsteps coming up the stairs, the baby gate at the top of the stairs open and close, footsteps coming into the living room, which bear in mind, I'm sleeping in the living room. And the footsteps would come right up to me and stop. And then I would feel that heavy feeling. So I knew that someone was standing over me because I could feel them invading my personal space. So the first few times this happened, I felt like this must be a family member. This must be my sister playing tricks on me. Because, for whatever reason, that was her favorite thing to do growing up. She loved to play tricks on me. But when I could hear the baby gate at the top of the stairs open and close, and I could hear footsteps approaching me, I knew there was no way that she could fake that. So eventually I just couldn't, I had to rule that out. There was just no way that could be happening, that she could be faking that. So, and some nights I would hear them, not only would the gate at the bottom of the stairs open and close, Footsteps come up the stairs. The gate at the top of the stairs open and close. Footsteps approach me and stop, and the heavy feeling. But then I would hear, after a few minutes, I would hear footsteps walking away from me. I would hear the baby gate at the top of the stairs open and close. Footsteps go down the stairs, the baby gate at the bottom open and close, and so on and so forth. Repetition, all night long. And I was exhausted. I was losing so much sleep because whoever this was pacing was keeping me up. So I got the idea that I would listen to the stereo at night to help me sleep. When this person was walking around at night and I couldn't sleep, I would just take the headphones that we had and plug them into the stereo and listen to music to help me sleep, to drown out the sound of footsteps. So that was how I survived that. Well, eventually, the headphones that we had disappeared. I don't know where they went. Nobody admitted to taking them. They just disappeared one day. And so, of course, that night, I was up all night dealing with the footsteps. So the way that I decided I would deal with it is I would sneak into my sister's room, which used to be my room, and I would sleep in the floor in there. So that's what I did. Took my blanket and my pillow, and I snuck in the room, and I would lay down in the floor and try to go to sleep. Well, lo and behold, wouldn't you know that whoever it was began to follow me. So no sooner would I go lay down in the floor in my sister's room and start to go to sleep than whoever this was that was pacing would start walking down the hallway and get to the door, and the footsteps would stop. And then they would turn around and walk away, go back down the stairs. You could hear the baby gate open and close, etc., etc. And then they would come back up, walk to the door, and stop. And I would feel that heavy feeling again. The feeling that I got when I knew they were standing over me. And I just felt like there was no way that I could win. There was nothing I could do to get away from whoever this was. My stepfather had one of the old alarm clocks that you twist. You wind up with the key that you turn. And it had the two bells on the top and the little piece in between, that the little hammer that would, when the alarm would go off, that hammer would go back and forth between the two bells. And he let me use that. And he told me to just listen to the sound of the clock ticking, and it would help me sleep. I didn't tell him what was keeping me up. I just told him I couldn't sleep at night. And he let me use his alarm clock for some time, until one morning he woke up late for work, and then my mother took the alarm clock away from me, and I was no longer able to use it, and it was back to hearing the footsteps. So those are the things that happened in that particular home, in that small town. Midway through the year, the owners of that house decided to sell it, so we were forced with having to move out. The home that we moved into from that point was very rural. And the thing that the instance that happens next that I'm going to tell you about happened in that same small town, but a different area, because we had moved from the super active home out to a home in the country, because the owners of the active home had decided to sell it. So one day we were out taking a walk. It was my mother, one of my older sisters, and myself. And we were just kind of wandering around the dirt road, getting to know the area that we lived in a little better. And we found this old cemetery that was down the road from our home. And to me, when I first saw it, I thought it was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. First of all, it was set in the woods, and I've always been somebody that is really connected to the out of doors. I love being out of doors in nature. And if I can get away from people while I'm doing it, even better. That's how I've always been. I don't know why I've felt like that, but that's me. So, I thought it was beautiful because, it was set in the woods and the sun was shining down on it so beautifully, and the ground was covered with daffodils. And daffodils have always been my favorite flower. I mean, they pop up. They're almost the first flower to pop up in spring, and they pop up everywhere, and they're so happy looking, and they smell so good. I've always loved daffodils, and this little cemetery was covered with them. And just the smell of daffodils filled the air in the cemetery. So I thought that was the coolest place I'd ever seen. We spent a little bit of time in it that day, looking at the headstones and things, and some of the headstones were very, very old, and a lot of them were children. And according to my stepfather, the dates on the headstones and the fact that it was mostly children coincided with an influenza outbreak in the area at the time. And so he determined that these people must have passed away from influenza, the majority of them. So, and because so many of them were children and infants, my heart was broken a little bit over that, because I've just always felt like, our children and our infants need to be protected, that they are our greatest resource, and we should do whatever we could to protect them. And I just felt a huge loss that all these sweet children and infants didn't get to continue on this planet. So like I say, we spent time in the cemetery, and then we went home. Well, I couldn't wait. I could not wait to get more time to myself to go back to the cemetery alone, where I didn't have to be on someone else's schedule, and I could just hang out in the cemetery as long as I wanted. And that was my first experience being in a cemetery. So, I didn't really know about how heavy they could feel. I just thought it was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen, and I wanted to spend more time there. The heaviness was not a part of my experiences yet. So I couldn't wait to get back there. So at the earliest opportunity, I took off and found my way back to the cemetery and sat down in the middle of it, and in the middle of all those wonderful smelling flowers. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful spring day. I mean, it was a little breezy and there was still coolness in the breeze, but the sun was so warm and the smell of the daffodils was just almost overwhelming, and it smelled so good to me. So I found my way to the cemetery and sat down in the middle of it. And I'd probably been sitting there for just a short amount of time, maybe 10 minutes or so. And I noticed that the feeling changed. The sun was still out, and it was still just a little bit breezy and a coolness to the breeze, but I began to feel cold. And although the sun was shining, it didn't seem like it was shining as brightly as it was before. It just it seemed darker. It seemed darker, almost like there was a cloud over the sun, but there wasn't. And it seemed colder. And, I sat there, which, you would think that I would know better by this point, but I sat there trying to convince myself what was happening wasn't happening. So, because I tend not to give up easily. So if I'm trying to convince myself that none of these things are happening, I'm not going to give up on that until I just absolutely have no recourse but to let that idea go. So eventually, I stayed there after I noticed it got cold and seemed like there was a shadow over the sun. And I started seeing shadows moving. And bear in mind, this is in the middle of the day. I would just see them dart from headstone to headstone on the edges of the cemetery. And at first I was like, no, that's probably, a bird just probably flew by real fast or something like that, And I began to see it more and more. And closer and closer. And I was like, no, there's something going on here. What's happening? And I started feeling like, a voice in my head saying, you should leave. You should leave here. But I didn't want to leave because it was so pretty. And the next thing I know, very close to me, I heard laughter. And it was a boy's laughter. And very close to me, I heard a boy's laughter. And then further away, I heard the laughter of two little girls. So kind of at the edge, still hanging around the edge of the cemetery, I heard them laughing. And the little boy's laugh, the way that he laughed, and he laughed like right over my shoulder. I felt like that was not a positive energy coming from him. And as soon as that happened, I jumped up and I started to walk away. And they began to follow me. And the reason that I know they were following me was I had that same cold feeling and I felt heaviness on my back. And I could hear laughter, the laughter. And I felt like they were mocking me. At that point in time, I felt like they were mocking me. Looking back on it now, with the way that I have come to view these interactions, I feel like they probably weren't mocking me. It's just that I was so used to being mocked that I just took it that way. My little paranoid self just took it that way. I think they most likely were trying to play with me, because nobody ever came there. And certainly no one close to their age ever came there and wanted to be there for any extended period of time. And, I started realizing too that there may be a reason that spirits were drawn to me as well. A reason beyond, a reason more than just I had been blessed with the family gifts. There may be more to it than that. Because things just have happened so frequently that there very well could be more to it. So, as I walked toward home, I felt like they were following me into the woods toward the house. And I felt like they followed me for quite some time before the feeling of heaviness and my personal space being invaded was relieved, began to dissipate, as it usually did when the spirit would return to wherever it came from or back off of me. So needless to say, I didn't go back to that cemetery just because I felt so uncomfortable. At this point in time, I'm still a child. All these things are still happening to me. I don't have a sounding board. I don't have anyone I can talk to about them. Being raised in a very religious household where, I pretty much was made known to me that I was not allowed to speak about these things, nor was anyone allowed to speak to me about them, so I was just left to feel uneasy about the whole entire situation and the whole process, So I always felt threatened, but I don't, as a child. Let me clarify that. I felt threatened as a child, but I think it was just because I had no one to talk to about it that could enlighten me, and because I was growing up in an ultra-religious household. As an adult, I don't see it as threatening. It's more like, oh, hey, okay. Don't know who this is, but I get it. I feel you. I feel you. I see you, whatever it is. But as a child, I didn't have the luxury to feel that way, I guess you could say. So anyway, I told you that a lot of things would happen in this episode because this is one of the more active periods in my life. The previous episode, not so active. This one, very, very active. And, the ebb and the flow of it. That's how it is. And that's I know it's because I don't throw the doors wide open and say, hey, everybody, come on in. I feel like I have to protect myself, not because they're a threat, but just because I personally cannot handle it. It just can be overwhelming sometimes. So, I have developed tools to deal with it and made a connection with my ancestors to deal with it, which I'll clue you in on later on in my podcasts as well. I'll let you know what what I'm referring to. But just remember, if someone close to you is approaching you with things that are occurring to them, it costs you nothing to sit there and listen and just hug them and say, thank you for sharing that with me. It costs nothing, and it can mean the world to them. So, and if you are having things happen to you and you need somebody to say, hey, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. You're not losing your mind. If you're feeling that way and you're having things happen, I am right there with you. And it will be okay. Just be patient. Don't panic. Just start looking at it as just a part of your life. And, recognize if you start experiencing feelings that don't make sense with who you are as a person, recognize that you may be picking up on someone else's feelings, whether it is another living person, or it could very well be a spirit as well. And don't be afraid of it, but also set your boundaries. You can set boundaries as well. So, and I've learned that. I've had to teach myself that. So eventually in these podcasts, I'll give you some tips on how to do that. But don't worry. It's okay. It's okay. Don't be afraid. I understand that it can be scary, but it's all in how you perceive it. And it also, just be mindful of the fact that they may not know how to approach somebody that's living and can see them, and they recognize someone that finally can see them. But you'll be okay. Don't let it terrify you. You'll be all right. All right. Thank you for joining me. Stay with me, stick around, come back, however you want to view it for my next podcast. Guess what? We moved to another part of the country. Shocker, right? But hang in there and I'll share some more of my experiences with you. And I will introduce you to some of the things that I do that help me deal with the influx of contact that I get, and tell you the conclusion that I've come to as to why this is happening to me. So, thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll join me for my next podcast.